Today, we're cracking open a fascinating book called Inside a Leader's Mind, Trump, by Chris Biryev. But here's the thing, this isn't your typical political book or biography. Nope, this is something else entirely. It's framed as a psychological analysis, an attempt to build a predictive model of its subject. Let's dive in and see what that actually looks like.
And this quote, it is the guiding principle for the whole thing. The author's goal here isn't to praise or to condemn. It's to try and get inside the psychological machinery, to see if it's possible to predict behavior. It's all about spotting the patterns, not about picking a side.
So the book kicks off with a pretty bold claim. It basically says that all the years of fact-checking, all the public condemnation, from a strategic point of view, it just hasn't worked. So what's the alternative? Well, the book argues we need a kind of user manual, a guide that shows us what inputs lead to what outputs.
Right, so this whole user manual idea is really the core of the book. We're not talking about a life story here. We're talking about understanding a system. What happens when you push certain psychological buttons? What are the patterns that just keep repeating themselves? And crucially, where did they come from?
And to back this up, the book points to some pretty wild data. Over 30,000 documented false or misleading claims made during his presidency. The author uses this to argue that traditional responses, like moral outrage, well, they just couldn't keep up.
And it's not just about words. The book also points to recent, major legal events. We're talking a 34-count felony conviction and civil penalties that are getting close to $500 million. And yet the author argues the basic political dynamic? It hasn't really changed. This is presented as the ultimate proof that a different kind of approach is needed.
Okay, so if we're talking about an operating system, you gotta ask, right, where did that code get written? The book argues you have to go all the way back to the beginning, to what it calls the formative wounds of childhood. It suggests the person we see on the world stage today was fundamentally shaped by some very specific, very powerful experiences early in life.
The book really zeroes in on a few key moments. You've got his birth into a really high-pressure family in Queens. Then, a sudden, long absence of his mother when he was at a really crucial age. And then, at just 13 years old, being sent off to military school. Each one of these, the book argues, installed another piece of psychological code.
All right, so the first big piece of the puzzle, according to the book, is something it calls the ghost mother. When he was just 2.5, his mom, Maryanne, had a life-threatening medical emergency. For the better part of a year, she was in and out of hospitals, and for a while there, it really wasn't clear if she was going to make it.
So think about the psychological impact of that. For a kid that young, the person you depend on for literally everything can just vanish without warning. The book explains that this can create a really deep insecurity. It teaches the child a hard lesson, that the world is an unreliable, even dangerous place.
So how does a little kid cope with that kind of fear? The book suggests they develop what psychologists call a false self. You can think of it like a suit of armor, a protective mask. It's a performance of strength designed to hide that vulnerable kid inside. The whole point of the false self is to say, I don't need anyone. Because, well, needing someone turned out to be way too painful.
And then, layered on top of that, you have the second big wound the book identifies, the influence of his father, Fred Trump. The author paints a picture of a really brutal family dynamic where being nice was seen as being weak. According to the book, the only way to get love and approval was to be a killer, to dominate, and to win, no matter the cost.
Okay, so you've got this childhood programming in place. The book then argues that this programming gets reinforced, even weaponized by two key external forces. It calls them dark mentors, and it says they're the ones who installed his adult operating system.
First up is the New York Military Academy. The book claims that instead of, correcting his behavior, the academy actually rewarded his drive for dominance. It basically took his dad's lessons and made them official policy. Hierarchies are there to be climbed, and rules are just a system to be gamed.
And then came Roy Cohn, his lawyer and mentor. The book presents Cohn's playbook as the final critical software installation. Just 3 simple rules that would go on to define his public life. 1, always attack, never ever defend. 2, deny reality, even when the facts are staring you in the face. And 3, no matter what happens, you always claim victory.
All right, so we've seen the programming, the psychological code. Now, the book shifts to show how that code produces really predictable patterns of behavior. These are the outputs that it says have defined his entire career in business and in politics.
The book breaks it all down into 4 main patterns. First, there's the dominance machine, that constant need to be on top. Second, the vengeance algorithm, the automatic impulse to punish any slight. Third, the loyalty trap, demanding total loyalty from others, but not necessarily giving it back. And finally, the mythology of the dealmaker, crafting this public narrative of success, whatever the reality might be.
Let's just drill down on one of these for a second, the vengeance algorithm. The book argues this isn't just some personality quirk, it's a core, unchangeable program. Any perceived criticism, any betrayal, no matter how small or how long ago it happened, gets logged and eventually it has to be punished. It's predictable and, the book argues, an inescapable part of his operating system.
So what does this all add up to? Well, the book's conclusion is all about predictability and what this psychological blueprint really means for the future. And it's a pretty stark, uncompromising assessment.
This ancient quote, "Character is fate," is absolutely central to the book's final argument. The idea here is that the behaviors we see aren't just random choices being made in the moment. No, they are the direct, unchangeable result of a character that was forged decades and decades ago. And that leads right to the book's final, powerful conclusion. If the underlying psychological structures, the wounds, the defenses, that entire operating system, if all of that is locked in place, then future actions can be predicted with a really high degree of confidence. The patterns of the past, the book argues, are a clear blueprint for the future.
And so we're left with the book's final, really provocative question. If these deep-seated psychological patterns are truly fixed, and if character really is fate, what does that actually mean for whatever comes next? That's the thought we'll leave you with today.